fundamentally, robo-advisors are significantly less expensive than, I'll just say, most traditional financial advisors. The whole idea sort of underpinning this, value that comes from artificial intelligence and using sophisticated data modeling and it being faster and more reliable, like all of that is passed on to you as an investor. I will also say that it is, and it's been proven, that it's statistically impossible for any human being to predict the day-to-day moves in the stock market. And so one of the other benefits of using this cutting-edge technology is that you're really just improving your odds a little bit. Welcome to the Rich and Regular podcast presented by Success, where we explore life at the intersection of money. I'm Julian.
And I'm Kirsten. Today, we're going to talk about robots.
Dun, dun, dun.
As in robo-advisors.
Yes.
As in, I'm fighting the urge to do the robot while I'm explaining robots.
And I am suddenly grateful this is a podcast and not a YouTube channel. I've been watching, for no reason that I can think of, but I've been watching a lot of The Matrix. Yeah, I've been rewatching it. This is probably the third or fourth time that I've been rewatching that series. So this is appropriate that we're talking about technology and robo-advisors and all of those things. Because when you watch that, it's really, I'll say this, it makes a little more sense to me now than it did when I watched it the first time.
100%. Like, if I had understood The Matrix the first time it came out, I'd be probably a billionaire.
Yeah, if I was like in tech, it would have totally made sense to me what they were really suggesting about the state of our world and where things were going. So all that to say, when you're done listening to this podcast, go rewatch The Matrix.
And which pill should people choose?
Oh, my goodness. Ooh, don't get me started. It was so creepy. Anyway, we are talking about robots. Yes, robots are coming. And in all seriousness, like the rise of robo-advisors is one of the reasons I fundamentally knew that money and investing was changing forever and that the pace of change would be faster than anyone could imagine. So just to put this in perspective, I want to go back in time here, and I am literally seeing and envisioning myself. It must have been the early 90s when my mother got a boombox with a CD player.
Oh, snap.
And I remember thinking, this is absolutely incredible. Like, you can just play the song. I would go back. I would go back and just start the song over, like just to see. Because my brain couldn't understand, first of all, how like all of that music just fit on this little thing that looked like metal, but was it plastic?
It looked like a mirror.
It was reflective. Yeah. It was so cutting edge at the time. Now, fast forward, I'm also old enough to remember like when the iPod came out. I didn't have an iPod. Like I couldn't. I mean, I got the iPod Nano, right? Like it was a more affordable version. And even then, I remember holding it in my hand and freaking out. Like, how is this even humanly possible that hundreds of songs can fit into this device? It was madness.
Yeah, I remember plugging it up to my computer because I didn't have a Mac at the time. I had a ThinkPad, like the brick. And
my brother is hopefully listening to this. I was just in Tampa. I took a picture of it, and he did not understand why I was amazed. He still has a ThinkPad. If anyone out there is listening that has a ThinkPad.
They make them nicer now, but we mean the thick ThinkPad.
Oh, no, it looked
like a
tank.
Textbook.
It was a tank. Anyway.
The biblical ThinkPad.
Yes.
Yeah, I used to plug in this iPod to my ThinkPad to load the songs on, and the fan on the ThinkPad would just start sounding like a jet.
Yeah.
The hard drive was just like, I don't know what you're doing.
Gotta rev that thing up. Yeah, I remember those days.
Yeah, I remember those days.
Yeah. So all that to say, like, I'm old enough to, I'm 41 years old as of this recording. But even still, I feel like a dinosaur when I start thinking about the impact that technology has had on my life from like childhood, teenage years, and even now in whatever this is called, the geriatric millennial age that I am at, right? Yeah. Like that is what technology has done. I remember cassettes to CD players to MP3s, iPods being merged into iPhones, and now you could just listen to it streaming from the cloud on your watch. You don't even need the phone.
Yeah, you don't even need a device.
You don't even need a device, right?
You just carry it to wherever you are.
I can't imagine what's coming next, but that is also making me think about The Matrix. So all of that to say, that is the impact of technology. If you're 30 years old, I really want you to do yourself a favor, maybe even press pause right now on this and just think about your earliest memory of technology, because I think it helps to set the tone for this conversation about robo-advisors.
Yeah, and I also think, because you're bringing up the media's role in how we think about the future, I think one of the biggest misconceptions about the future and the role that tech plays in our lives is that we're all thinking about this outdated image like the Jetsons, where the technology is visible and cars are flying and like your housekeeper is a literal robot. But technology, and more specifically automation, is already here. Yes. And movies like The Matrix were kind of giving us a preview of what that would be. And now, to your point, when I think about movies like Tenet that I tried to watch 3 times that I just did not understand, it's probably giving me some sort of indicator of like what's happening in the future. Because tech shows up in just like far more subtle and mundane ways. It's like a data integration here, personalized email, a little augmented reality. It's literally shaping our experiences in the physical world. And when you realize that, something like a robo-advisor just becomes a natural conclusion to what people do with tech.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So I want to jump into it because I am confident that a lot of people just don't really know what this is. Right. We don't oftentimes dive deep into a subject. We're not going to go that deep into it, but we do want to make sure that we're introducing it to people who may be unfamiliar. And if you are familiar, like, maybe you consider adding robo-advisory to a little dibble-dabble. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and jump in?
All right, so I'm going to nerd out really quick and just talk about algorithms, because if you want to understand robo-advisors, you have to understand algorithms. And the basic definition of an algorithm is just a complex formula that really only has 4 components. First, they collect information or data, whatever you want to call it. Then they analyze the data and look for important differences as well as important similarities. And then lastly, they just apply that analysis to generate a prediction, right? Yep. Sounds really simple. And if it sounds really simple to you, people take data, they look at the differences, the similarities, and generate a prediction. That's a good thing. And it should sound simple to you because algorithms are literally everywhere. If you've ever encountered a piece of technology and you're like, how did that work? The answer 99% of the time is an algorithm. So if you've unlocked your phone using your facial recognition or fingerprint scan, it's because your phone created an algorithm that can distinguish your face from your neighbor's face or your pointer finger from your thumb. Even something as simple as Google search is made more effective by algorithms. That's how it's able to finish your sentence before you even type it.
Yeah. And I think it's safe to say the word algorithm is practically synonymous with Google, yes. Right? So that's probably the first brand or thing that most people think about when they think about Google. I remember also when Google came out.
Wow.
I do. I remember graduating to Google and from like Yahoo or whatever it was. But I also think that's a really important distinction because at the time, Yahoo was the biggest, baddest sort of search engine that you could imagine. Mm-hmm. And I think part of what a lot of people are struggling with when it comes to robo-advisors, or why I think, quite honestly, a lot of people are sleeping on the power or validity or usage of a robo-advisor, is because what they have right now is kind of working perfectly fine, right? It's perfectly
okay.
Google was blazing fast.
Yeah.
And compared to Yahoo, you got better results for the most part. But like Yahoo still worked. It was pretty fine. There was no real reason to like rearrange your browser and, sort of thought patterns and all of that stuff. You were familiar with the interface. Right. You were familiar with the brand. You felt good about it. They had funny commercials. And it was like, there's no reason for me to go to this. What is a Google anyway? Who are these guys? I remember watching like CBS, I'm sure. It was probably on every network. But you would see these interviews with like Larry and Sergey, and they were like positioning these guys as the new guard. Like they were going to replace all of the people that we'd come to know as thought leaders and cutting edge sort of technologists. Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, all those guys were like old dogs compared to these cool young guys who are trying to explain algorithms. And, it's safe to say that if you weren't really in Silicon Valley, you were probably sleeping on them. And now when you think about the importance that Google plays, like I think that is reflective of the power of algorithms.
Yes. So the thing to remember about algorithms, I'm not going to harp on this point too long. I could, but I'm not going to, is that they just blow our human brains out of the water. We are great at finding patterns, but they can evaluate an enormous database with like multiple factors. And they have the ability to update their predictions in real time as they're learning new information. And that's something that our brains struggle with. Robots are immune to nagging friends and family members who, might apply this pressure for you to believe certain things or prevent you from believing something unconventional. We all are victims to this cultural pressure that when somebody comes out and tells you like, no, the earth is burning or the sky is like red, you're like, no, there's no way. Like, it's totally fine. So knowing that you have a bias and that robots don't is a really important trait when it comes to picking investments.
No, I'm not going to say robots don't have a bias, right?
That's true.
The code is written by human beings.
That's true.
Yeah.
However, the longer that algorithm, don't get me started on that rant. The code is originally written by humans, but after a while they deploy machine learning, which again is learning and adjusting based off of new information. So the longer an algorithm goes, ideally,
the more efficient,
the better it gets.
Yeah.
Unless there's a human in the back end saying, that can't be right. It must be a bug.
Yeah. Yeah. We're not like, stop thinking about the Instagram algorithm.
Oh, God.
If that's who you're, I'm sure some of our listeners are sort of referring to that.
Yes.
Okay. So let's dig in a little bit more. I would imagine if you are interested in robo-advisors, one of the first things you're going to do is like, which one? Like, should I, go with this company or that company, or should I just stick with my traditional advisor who may offer a robo-advisor? But a lot of the articles that I've seen are all pitting one against the other. Mm-hmm. Should you have a robo-advisor compared to a human being who is a experienced, traditional, dare I say, financial advisor? And we're here to tell you that that's a false choice. You don't have to choose, not just because you don't have to choose, like no one's forcing you to.
Right.
But even now, all of these companies are sort of all becoming hybrid. So let's talk about that just a little bit. When we talk about robo-advisors, I think it's fair and safe to start with the biggest, probably one of the better known ones, which, no pun intended, is called Betterment. It's the first, one of the biggest robo-advisors out there. They started as a robo-advisor. That was all they did. But now that they've gotten a little bit more mature, now even they offer different plans that offer you as a retail investor the opportunity to meet with a real person that works with Betterment. They understand the platform, they understand the funds that they manage, and so they can help supplement that if you've got a little bit too much algorithm in your life and you want to meet with a person. Another robo-advisor is Acorns, and I would say this is probably safer for the beginner investor or the person who really wants to have almost like accidental investing. And the way that Acorns works, it's a robo-advisor similar to Betterment, but it's a robo-advisor that rounds up your charges. And so essentially, if you have a debit card or a credit card, you can attach that to, or that account to Acorns. If you buy something for $1.50, the app will round it up to the nearest dollar and invest the difference. So that $1.50 charge will lead to a 50-cent investment that Acorns funds and invests and manages on your behalf.
Yeah, you mentioned that, old guard companies are adopting this new technology. I was reading about Vanguard, who literally kind of gave birth to the index funds and are as traditional as they get when it comes to financial advisory. Even they've updated their recent offering to include, robo-advisors and give investors that option.
Which is mind-blowing to me. Like when I think about Vanguard, like I feel like I can like smell the paper in their office. They are so old school, and they take pride in it. I'm willing to bet that
they're like the Larry David of
they absolutely are, and they take pride in it.
Know.
I'm sure everyone there wears khakis, and they have ThinkPads, and they're just trying to keep it old school and affordable because it works.
If you are wearing khakis with your ThinkPad, we still love you. However, there are
you gonna get these jokes.
Thinner, cooler laptops available. Okay. So with all of these options, the natural question is like, how do I pick one? And that's where sites like nerdwallet.com come in, which is really helpful because they provide ratings and reviews of these services. But I'd also say it depends on kind of where you want the majority of your funds to be. If you want to make the shift completely to robo-advisory, then it makes sense to work with a company that has led and specialized in that, like Betterment. Their investments are all pretty low cost investments. And so even with the robo-advisory service, you're not worried about them kind of moving your money into high fee, like stocks or indexes.
Yeah. And I think that leads me to like one of the biggest differences between traditional advisors and robo-advisors. If you're wondering like, why would I make the switch or make the adjustment? And a lot of it boils down to cost. The reality is robo-advisors aren't just there because they're more efficient. They pass on that efficiency to you as an investor by way of cost. And so fundamentally, robo-advisors are significantly less expensive than, I'll just say, most traditional financial advisors. The whole idea sort of underpinning this, value that comes from artificial intelligence and using sophisticated data modeling and it being faster and more reliable, like all of that is passed on to you as an investor. I will also say that it is, and it's been proven, that it's statistically impossible for any human being to predict the day-to-day moves in the stock market. And so one of the other benefits of using this cutting-edge technology is that you're really just improving your odds a little bit. To your point about how smart and blazing fast these things are, they're learning, they don't need breaks, they're constantly rebalancing, so you don't really have to do much. Like you're essentially trusting in the power of technology. So to put this in perspective, and not to continue to harp on like my age, but I do feel like in techno years, I feel like a dinosaur. I just think that if you're like me, you're in your 40s, or even if you're in your 30s, you've seen a really interesting stretch of time. And I think you have to ask yourself the question about whether or not some of the other advances that you've seen in technology are happening with investing. Like draw your own parallels. For me, it's like music and like, art, laptop, and even art. You may have a different set of examples, but I'm here to tell you that you're seeing right now similar sort of sophisticated and really fast innovation with investing.
Perfect. So when we get back from a quick break, I want to talk more about the services robo-advisors offer, and I want to share some stats on who's taking advantage of these robots. Okay, so let's talk about your first interaction with a robo-advisor, because I think that's part of the hump that people can't get over. Like when I tell you to go meet with a traditional advisor, you expect them to lead. And so when you're meeting with a robo-advisor, it's like, do I need to wear a tie? Like,
you're not meeting with a robo-advisor.
Exactly.
You're not putting on like a headset, going into the metaverse and saying, hi, my name's Julian. What's your name? R2476.
It works very similar to a dating app. So just like you would if you were logging into a dating app, set up a profile, your first interaction with a robo-advisor will usually be a survey that's designed to kind of assess your risk tolerance, your goals, your investing preferences. And from there, the service's algorithm will recommend several portfolio choices that'll range from conservative to aggressive, all based on your answers. So you're still able to veto if you prefer different options, and you give feedback. It's not like just the wild, wild west where the robo-advisor just picks some stuff.
Yeah.
So in addition to kind of selling and purchasing stocks on your behalf, they also offer services like automatic rebalancing, which is putting more of your money towards the winners. They also offer tax optimization, just like traditional portfolio management. And if you were to use a human financial advisor for these services, you would likely need a really high balance to qualify, or pay some steep fees like transaction fees or even a % of your assets, versus this kind of happens, it's a box that you opt into with robo-advisors.
Yeah, I also think there's an element of comfort, at least for me, that comes with what I'm referring to as like this intake process. So I'm thinking back to when I first met with a financial advisor, and you're sort of sharing intimate details about your financial history, how much you earn. I remember even having a conversation where he was trying to gauge like what my earning potential could be in the future and that sort of thing, understanding your budget, and as a result, helping you to make some decisions around what your sort of investing strategy and preferences and really just the amount that you might be willing to part ways with as a part of that conversation. And it's a very similar process, but it's just like filling in an online form. But my point is, I think there's a greater element of trust here because if we're being honest, I think a lot of people are, especially if you're just starting out and meeting with a financial advisor, like you don't really know that person. Like, so to share that kind of details with them can be a little bit uncomfortable. I think for those that are more familiar with having an online relationship, that an robo-advisor might actually be more beneficial for you because there's no real reason to lie. In this case, you can just say, this is exactly how much I earn. This is exactly my sort of tolerance. And they'll sort of coach you through or help you answer questions and say, well, this is your profile. And as a result, this is what we're going to do on your behalf.
Yeah, totally agree. I think there's a lot to think about here in the space, and it's moving so quickly that I'm willing to bet, 6 to 12 months from now, a lot of this information might be outdated. But we talk about it all the time. People don't have to be intimidated, right?
Yeah, no, I don't think they should be intimidated at all. I mean, it can be scary, like when you think about it. And of course, if you have nightmares about the Matrix and thinking robots are taking over. But the way I would think about it is, especially, or even when we had financial advisor, we now self-manage our funds. Your advisor is using technology and data modeling and all of these things too. And so the way that I think about it, this is really just a bit of a natural progression. And you're just kind of cutting out the middleman and you're just relying on the set of data and the recommendations that your advisor is likely getting from the same sort of, reporting that they would offer. And I think that's part of the reason why these companies are coming in and by these companies, I mean robo-advisors, because they realize that there's a lot of value there. And that's not to dismiss the value in having a traditional financial advisor or a human being that you can talk to, because obviously there are conversations and situations that you may be going through and things that you can discuss with a person that you can't necessarily do with a robo or through a robo-advisor.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think times are changing, but they have been changing for a while. A lot of the opportunities that we're seeing and a lot of the innovation that we're seeing in the finance space started after the 2008 crisis when banks lost the trust of customers and were basically unable to perform a lot of their services the same way. The technology was already being used in ATMs, by tellers, but when banks lost customer flow, the technology companies were like, well, let's just provide it for the customer. So you've been using a lot of this stuff through a bank or a financial institution for a long time. Obviously, COVID accelerated the adoption of a lot of this stuff, but it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, and I think COVID also accelerated the rise of more self-educated and self-investors or people who are self-investing. Yeah. Found some information online, no surprise there, about that. And one of the articles I was really, really intrigued by, it's a little, well, I'll let you look it up, but it's a Wall Street Journal article that was really talking about the rise of people who are choosing to self-advise their funds. And they found that 70% of households with a net worth of $500,000 or more, headed by a person under 45, shout out to you millennials, was mostly self-directed. All right, so I'll say that again. 70% of households with a net worth of $500,000 or more, headed by a person under 45, was mostly self-directed. These are people who are, like us, choosing to self-manage their funds instead of working with a financial advisor. I think a lot of that comes with the rise of self-education, people realizing what the actual cost, short-term and long-term, is in working with a financial advisor. And I think this is part of the reason why people or the media in many ways are pitting the two against each other, because it's safe to say that robo-advisors are slowly stealing share in customers, arguably, from traditional financial advisories. But I also found another survey just to sort of identify, well, who else are these people or what are the other generations doing? How do they view this? And it's not to suggest that self-advisory implies that you're using a robo-advisor. It could just imply that you're using a brokerage account or a self-directed IRA or something like that. But an article that I found on Investopedia that showed adoption rates for robo-advisors by generation showed, and no surprises here, Gen X lagging behind a little bit at around 13%. Gen Y, aka millennials, were around 20% adoption. So about 20% of millennials are big fans of robo-advisors. But then you see this big jump to 30% with Gen Z, right? Which I find really, really interesting because it kind of speaks, and I'm just speaking on behalf of millennials here, it to me suggests that we're still sort of holding on to the past, the old way of doing things, but fair to say that we're just dabbling, whereas Gen Z is like, nah.
Yeah.
Like, I saw how that worked out for you guys. Like, this article did not suggest what that data looks like for boomers, but if it's anything like the conversations that I've had with some of my older family members, like, you know, they're not even considering that. They've got their guy, they've got their gal, that's who they've worked with, and they're not even considering switching that up. So no
Shout
surprises
out to
there.
Gen Z. I call them Gen Z. Gen Z. Disrupting stuff, shaking the table.
Yeah.
But I like what you said about, you know, not having to choose either or. You can definitely do both a robo-advisor and a traditional advisor. So I actually looking for, you know, the happy medium. You know how I do. I actually found some stats on hybrid users who are people who do a little bit of both. And about a third of hybrid users are in their 30s and almost 40% are under 40, which shows that even if you're an elder millennial or you're someone who might be a little skeptical of technology, you can still experiment. In fact, most of the people who are doing a little bit of both are, you know, in that age group.
Yeah, we've mentioned this before. I believe it was in the podcast around brokerage accounts or something like that. We've probably said it several times, but I do think that people owe it to themselves to dabble, right? It's one thing to grow accustomed to what a service level looks like or what a rate of return looks like with one pile of money in the hands of a traditional financial advisor. But I think you owe it to yourself to have something to compare that to, because I think that that's part of the reason whenever I introduce this and identify all these examples that I believe should make people say, actually, you know what? I should consider this. They just write it off. And it's because they don't have anything to compare it to. It goes back to the example of Yahoo. It's like, dude, this works pretty good. And it's like, yeah, but this marginal difference or just this shaving off this little difference in terms of cost or points or just efficiency or rebalancing or just even time, right? Like in stress levels, all of that stuff could have a huge impact on your return in the short term and the long term.
Dang, we owe it to ourselves to dabble. I like that. Is that your final thought?
It might be. We'll see. Why don't you go ahead? Let's wrap this up. Tell me what your final thoughts are.
I mean, I'm not sure how I can top that. It's just so short and cute. But I'll just piggyback on things that we've said earlier and say that the technology is showing no signs of slowing down. Even if you think you don't have time to research or you're dealing with a unique situation, there are all these new startups that are popping up every year to combat those feelings and actually offer alternatives to traditional financial services, even beyond just advice and investment management. The list of services is expanding and it's really exciting to see. And the good news is that the space is going to get even more competitive, which should lead to lower costs for investors. So, you know, hopefully there's a brighter future for all of us.
Yeah. You know, we've said this before. My final thought is similar in that I don't think people should be intimidated by it, but I would ask our listeners to, especially those that are old enough to remember, because I've listed quite a few, but hey, I'm old enough to remember when Facebook went public. I remember when Netflix went public. I remember, you know, all of these companies when they were in their infancy and now they are a part of names. American. Yeah. Like, we all wish we could go back in time and make these investments in these early tech companies, but you can't. No one can. Right. What you can do is just participate in tech, and I think that using a robo-advisor is one way of doing that. Obviously, you can invest in tech and invest in tech companies, but I think if you really believe and understand and have seen how these companies have fundamentally shifted day-to-day life in this country and really around the world, then you should really give robo-advisors a chance. I think because of the growth of cryptocurrency, it's almost as if people have completely overlooked robo-advisor as a huge innovation, and they've sort of defined tech and innovation in the finance space with cryptocurrency and blockchain in mind, but robo-advisors is still relatively young. So you have a chance to jump into this. And I think part of the reason, this is a longer final thought that I normally do.
This is an additional segment.
But I think part of the reason why people haven't done it is because they haven't attached a face to it, right? If you think about successful real estate investors, successful tech startup founders, there's always a face to it. There's not a face or there aren't faces of people that people can point to and say, these are people who have become millionaires or multimillionaires through robo-advisories. Right. And the moment we have that and the moment people start to identify with those people, I think that's when you'll start to see a significant rise in adoption rates, and it'll be the new normal.
Wow. I love it. Well, thank you for listening to another episode of the Rich and Regular podcast presented by Success. If you like what you heard and want to help this podcast fight the algorithm that is podcast rankings,
well played.
Please leave us a 5-star rating and review, and we will see you next week.
Well played.
I'm always big for it.